Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper.
On Cinco de Mayo, right?
Cinco de Mayo.
The 5th of May.
2019.
That's right. So we're in a celebratory mood. Celebratory mood. Almost got carried away. And
who doesn't love a celebratory nude?
I'm sure there's a Mexican...
but not here. Not now.
Yeah, all right. Let's get off to a different subject. So it's been a busy week, as it always is, a busy week. And we went to Cabaret this week. Cabaret, as opposed to theater. We went to...
a cabaret performance.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
At 54 Below.
Which is a cabaret. That's the way the word is used.
Right,
yes.
But I don't want people to think that we went to a performance.
No one's thinking that.
Of Cabaret.
No, 54 Below. We mentioned 54
Because I know
Below.
you're thinking about Cabaret because you're watching that Fosse Verdon show.
Yeah, I am. But okay. That thing's running out of steam. But in any event, 54 Below, which is the cabaret performing venue, which is right next to Studio 54, so it's 8th Avenue.
Michael Feinstein's little boîte.
That's right. And we saw Michael Feinstein, what was it, a million years ago?
Or
several million years ago when he was just a boy performing at the Algonquin. So we'll talk about Michael Feinstein in the future. But in any event, we've been to 54 Below a few times. We always enjoy it. It's probably worth spending 30 seconds on it for those who don't know. But what you do is you sign up, you get reservations. It costs about the same as a Broadway ticket, generally. And
sometimes more.
Sometimes a little bit more. You buy dinner, but the dinner doesn't cost you any more than the dinner at a restaurant would, and it's not bad. You just share a table with another couple, which is fine.
Not always, but often.
And you chat them up, and we always meet some interesting people.
You don't have to chat them up.
But
of course we do.
We were very big chatters. And we had a group who live in, a couple live in Long Island City, who comes in regularly. Have been to 54 Below more times than we have been. And they were enthusiasts, and we're enthusiasts too. And we saw what I would think fairly say is one of the more high-profile, acts that you see if you look at the calendar for 54 Below, and that is a duo, namely Norbert Leo Butz performing with Sherry Renee Scott. Now, they performed together. They've obviously performed separately before. They both. Should we spend a minute as to who they are and what they've been in?
Go ahead. Tell me who they are.
Well, Sherry Renee Scott, we had seen in a show before, right? Which is Everyday Rapture, which is her one-woman show some years ago. She's her bona fides in terms of Broadway. She performed, some years ago in the last 5 years. Then, I don't know if I'm going to give it an exact order. She was in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. She was in Aida. She was in The Little Mermaid. She played Ursula. She often plays the villain, strangely enough. And she was in Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. She's very good. She's a very good singer. Turns out she now has developed a music company. She's one of the producers of, it's called Shish Kaboom, whose mission is to sort of bring together Broadway with more pop music sensibilities. They happen to produce a lot of Broadway albums. They produced In the Heights and a few others. So she's an executive at this point. She's from Kentucky. And she's a pro. She was performing with Norbert Leo Butz. And he, too, started in the last 5 years. And that's part of the story we'll get back to in a minute. He was in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with Sherry Renee Scott. He was in Catch Me If You Can. He was in Big Fish. And actually, he's won the Tony for Best Actor in a Musical twice for Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and Catch Me If You Can. And that's a big deal. Right. I mean, I was looking that up. There's only one person who's on that level who exists today, and that's Nathan Lane. And he hasn't won one of those for a long time. So maybe Norbert Leo Butz is a little bit under the radar. But he's a great talent.
But he was in My Fair Lady this year.
And I should have mentioned, he was in My Fair Lady this year. So
as the father.
As the father, yeah.
As Eliza.
The so-called Stanley Holloway part.
Right. I'm getting married to church on time.
I'm getting married in the morning. There you go. So he's a tremendous talent. They're both great talents. And it was kind of interesting in that they had put this together. It was almost like a little play. They had sort of a running dialogue based on their relationship together. Again, as I mentioned, they were both in the last 5 years. They were both in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. They have a history together. And they've known each other 20,
So they
25 years.
crafted a little sort of
story.
narrative.
Right. And whether that was 100% true, I don't know. Whether it was creative, I don't know. But it had to do with some kind
I'm sure it was enhanced.
It must have been. I mean, actually, I should admit, they even met in Rent before that. But it was based on their getting in and out of each other's lives, some sexual tension between them, their failed relationships with others. But it was not to say it was totally serious. It just gave some structure to the whole evening and the various songs they did. And they had great banter together. They've known each other forever. They're kidding around together. And they're both tremendous talents. What surprised me, at least, was that almost all the music was I would call pop or rock music as opposed to Broadway music. They weren't reprising their, showstoppers from Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. That's not what they were doing.
They were doing from Rent.
Right. But they were doing more stuff that wasn't any show stuff at all. They were doing, I mean, he did a song from the last 5 years. But it was more, pretty almost New Orleans jazz type at one point. It was pretty energetic. So, and some of it was pretty modern music. At one point, she was doing a number from Fleetwood Mac, basically.
Right.
But I enjoyed it a great deal, and it was an interesting creative process, really, that they put that together. It was no small thing. They were very casual about it, but I don't think they're casual at all. He's performed at 54 Below a couple of times. He has done some CDs based on his 54 Below performances, which I didn't realize. And he has a couple of record albums out, and they're all rock music oriented. They're really not show music oriented. So this is what he's interested in. And I think that's what you see in Cabaret. Folks get a chance to do what they really want to do.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Well, it was a good show.
Yeah. All
right. It was a good show. And I am charmed by this notion of up close and personal.
Right.
Which we have just come to sort of late in our lives.
Right.
And that is always intriguing. But you know what? To be honest, in terms of the music, I just love Norbert Leo Butt's sort of standard character.
Yeah.
That sort of smart alecky guy, a little bit of a wiseacre.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love his Broadway voice, that sort of nasal kind of voice. And I was disappointed not to hear that.
Yeah.
So that was disappointing. On the other hand, I am not a fan of Sherry Renee Scott. I did not like Everyday Rapture. And here I was quite charmed by her. She was funny. She was adult. She had kind of an adorable costume. She was wearing sequin hot pants with a 54 Below t-shirt and a little jacket. And I just found her completely engaging. So I did enjoy the show. It was not what I was expecting.
Right.
And I can just imagine them crafting this show and say, well, nobody's going to be expecting this.
Right.
In the sort of older, cabaret crowd that you usually see at 54 Below. It was fun, but I would still love to hear him. I have never seen him really in a big part on stage.
Yeah.
And I would love to see that.
Yeah. Well, look,
because I love his voice. I love that attitude.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you. I mean, I enjoy the show a great deal. And the choice of music wouldn't have been my choice of music. Notwithstanding, that's what he wants to sing. It was fine. But to me, it didn't really distinguish his voice as much as some other stuff he could have done. And he's done some absolutely show-stopping stuff. And I'm thinking of, and Catch Me If You Can, he did a number called... it ain't worth whatever if you don't obey the rules. And it's a song and dance number. And he's playing an FBI guy. And it brought the house down. But it's a pattern number. That's what he's famous for. Pattern numbers. Fast talking, rhythmic, highly energetic, Broadway type stuff.
Well, I'll tell you, they were energetic in this performance.
Yeah, well, that's for
They
sure.
were sweating bullets.
Yeah, they were.
They were working hard.
But that's one of the great things of Cabaret. It's not necessarily exactly what you'd expect. Sometimes it's going to be unexpected. But the immediacy of it, the fact that the performers are right there, the crowd loved it. Certainly worth going to. Really enjoyed it a great deal.
We had a great time.
Yeah,
and we're going out again this week.
Yes, we are,
because it's Encore's time.
That's the sound. I'm going out with my husband. Sounds good.
Well, it's just Encore's. I married an angel.
Well, that was the last time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
people
not.
are going to take you seriously.
That was not my favorite.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
So
this is called High Button Shoes. Again, Encores is the
so
revival.
I'm very nervous. If it's another disappointment.
Yeah, it's a 1947 musical about a couple of guys. I guess you told me who were sort of on the lam or something from.
No, they're con men. It's some kind of Jersey kind of road trip musical.
It's the original Jersey Boys, really, when you think about it.
On the way to Atlantic City or something, I don't know.
It is a Jules Stein musical. It's an early musical, 1947. Jules Stein, of course, Funny Girl, and to your heart, Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol.
Right.
So how bad can it be there? It's Jules Stein.
Right. How bad can it be?
And we'll see. I mean, look, we normally...
Michael Urie is in it.
Yeah, we've never seen Michael Urie.
Yeah.
Right. He was in the the reprise of something just recently. I can't remember what it was. But he's a big name in Broadway now. And, we normally love encores.
So we'll see. Okay, let's
see.
not dwell on everything we don't know.
Yes, well, but you got to buy tickets now because the next time we're going to be here, it'll be over. It's just a weekend set of performances. If you're interested,
For those listeners who are dialing up the podcast on a timely basis,
exactly right.
If you're listening to this in 2020,
forget it.
Too late.
You missed it. Speaking of things that are timely, the Kentucky Derby. So we should explain. We watched the Kentucky Derby.
We often try to watch the Kentucky Derby. I don't know why. It's not like I'm a horse racing fan.
We have our mint juleps. And
we do not have mint juleps.
You're in there with the juleps and with the mints, making the mint juleps.
Although you do often wear your bonnet while you're watching it.
That's good, Tamsen. We're in the mode. We're in the mood. We even watched the pregame. And they bring the horses down. And yesterday it was in the pouring rain. You had to feel bad for all those folks, even the horses to some degree. And they had a race which has become controversial. As you may have heard by now, if you follow horse racing in the least or read a newspaper, it is a situation in which a horse named Maximum Security crossed the finish line first. And they started with the storylines and heartfelt interviews with the trainer who hadn't won too much, and now he had his big victory, and the jockey, etc.
And then the trainer immediately called his dad.
Right, called his dad.
Because his brother had won it, actually.
That's right. Smarty Jones, 15 years ago, yeah.
So it was all a big
very
emotional thing.
And
the young jockey, very emotional, very ecstatic.
It's his dream. He's from a foreign country, and now he's on the big stage. And then disaster strikes. Word comes in that an objection has been filed from the jockey of the horse that came in second, named Country House. And it's an interesting situation. Actually, it turned out, as it developed, a couple of objections came, not just from that jockey. But they were all horses that didn't figure, the other horses didn't figure in anything. They were in the mix toward the end, but they weren't near the front at the very end. And so the most interesting objection was from Country House, who came in second. And the objection stemmed from the fact that as they turned for home, Maximum Security veered to the outside to some degree, went from like they call it, lane 2 to lane 4. They're not really strictly lanes, it's just a way to think about it. And by veering out, he almost collided with a couple of horses behind him, and that kind of hustle and bustle.
And that's bad behavior?
Yes, that put off Country House. It was a little bit outside.
Are you sure he just didn't slip? I mean, it was muddy out there.
He probably did slip. They said he actually leapt over a puddle is what got it going, and it was crowd noise. It was an impossible situation. But here's the thing. So we're sitting there watching everybody else, 22 minutes, while the judges figure out whether they're going to take down Maximum Security and give it to Country House or keep it the way it was. And they ultimately decide that the objection stands. They take down Maximum Security. They have a new winner, Country House, a 69-1 shot, which nobody...
69, I thought it was 65.
65, 69, whatever. The point is that nobody picked that horse to win the race. 0 people.
Dang, if only we had picked that horse.
We'd be sitting pretty. Right. But the point is, it's a political discussion now, and of course Trump is weighed in, but putting aside what Trump said, it is kind of interesting because there are 2 ways to looking at it. There's probably only one. But
what did Trump say?
Trump says it should have never happened. They should have never taken the horse down. He was the best horse. And this was a PC thing to do.
Trump had money on that horse, I guess.
That's the answer. Trump had money.
That's an easy one.
Maximum security. So we'll stop with that.
A no-brainer.
But here's the thing. I mean, there are two ways to look at it. And there's probably only one, but there's two ways if you don't look at the rules. And fortunately, we were blessed with broadcasters who didn't realize there were rules. So they were willing to talk about things with no basis. The initial reaction of the broadcasters was, well, gee, he would have won anyway. What's the big deal? Give it a maximum security didn't affect the outcome because the slipping and sliding had to do with horses who weren't really pressing for the lead by the end of it. And it turns out, though, I think that if you look at the rules, it doesn't work that way. If the rules don't say, don't take the horse down, if he's the best horse ought to be rewarded. That's not what the rules say. What the rules say is if you do something wrong, regardless of the horse that you happen to foul, whether he was coming in second or fourth or eighth, then you are taken down. That's disqualified. And that's what happened. Right. And if you just look at the rules that way, it's kind of not much to argue about, not much debate.
Let's just face it.
What?
Because maximum security got disqualified, your horse...
My horse.
Who would have been in fourth place, moved up to third, Tacitus.
Not only that.
So,
not only that, but Tacitus was trained by the same trainer as the trainer for Country House, the same guy, Bill Mott. So
that guy is rolling in dough now.
My point is, I pretty much picked the winner by picking the horse that comes in third.
How unusual for you.
So I'm on a roll. And, but, this is going to be widely debated. I can see it both ways. But I think it's nice to know the rules. And if you know the rules, I think it's probably not that close a case. It was a 3 stewards vote. It was 3-0 in favor of disqualification. They refused to give any interviews afterwards. But you'll be interested to know, the New York Times had a headline today about that was a very brave and correct decision. USA Today came out and said maximum security was robbed. It's an awful thing, and it's another reason why horse racing is going down the tubes. So I think people are going to fight about it.
All right. Interesting.
All right. We just wanted to say a few words about NBA basketball. And for that, we're bringing in our NBA specialist, Granger Abuhoff, who knows far more about the NBA than even Tamsen does. So,
is this about the championship things?
Yes, it's the playoffs.
Oh, okay.
And NBA stands for National Basketball Association.
No, I know what that is, but some people listen, or somebody's going to listen to this the other time of year. They won't know the context.
All right, so here we go.
Right now, playoffs are going on.
And there's one to me, the biggest story in the playoffs is the Greek Freak, and the Greek Freak is not a pejorative term. Don't get me wrong, but he does have a name, and his name, Granger, is.
Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Yeah, that sounds right. And he is this Greek youth who came he's Nigerian, or his family's Nigerian, and he grew up in Greece. And the Times has an interesting piece about how that puts you in sort of the edge of Greek society, honestly, and it was in a very sort of destitute area. But the basketball first, Granger. Am I wrong? I mean, is the Greek Freak not dominating the playoffs as in the way he also dominated the regular season?
Who does he play for?
He plays for the Bucks, and he's doing really well this playoffs. I think that you have to put him up with a group of the best players in the playoffs right now. Probably Kevin Durant is playing a little bit better, but no one else is playing better than the Greek Freak.
And he is a 24-year-old who is, I'll say, 6'11", and is called a Greek Freak because of his athletic skills are off the charts. He jumps like crazy, he dunks, he goes to the basket, he shoots threes once in a while, he dribbles with both hands. Am I exaggerating?
Yeah, so statistically, he's actually very similar to Shaq in certain ways because he's such a good finisher around the rim.
Right. But
unlike Shaq, he's a thin guy who dribbles down fast breaks. He does a little bit of posting up, but is much more playing in transition, driving to the basket. So some parts of him are like a center, some parts of him are like a point guard. And he's very good defensively, too.
And he's taken over a couple of these playoff games. I mean, the playoffs are where it matters in the NBA. Boston won the first game in their series, but the next two were won by the Bucks because this guy just got it going in the third quarter, and they have no answer for them, right?
Yeah, the Bucks' strategy when things get tough is Giannis, go to the basket, everyone else is a shooter. And, that it mainly works because they can't stop him. The main thing that happened with him in this series so far is that Al Horford, who's always a defensive specialist this time of year, has been pretty good shutting him down. unless they call Al Horford for fouls. And that's kind of what's deciding the series.
Yeah, Al Horford's not nearly as athletic as him. And I was surprised that he blocked his shot in the first game, but he can't keep that up.
Yeah, well, Al Horford knows where he's going now, so he'll back up to the basket.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that Giannis doesn't have is a super reliable jump shot. But he doesn't need it. He's so good at finishing. He's so athletic. He's so determined and coordinated that he doesn't need the jump shot yet.
Well, I'm sorry, what?
So where did you learn to play basketball?
Well, that's the strange thing. So the time story is that this fellow, Giannis, grows up in Greece, and he's on the margins of society. His family has trouble eking out a living at all. He's on the street. They quote various friends. He was always hungry, looking for food. Here's one quote. He didn't have anything. He had one pair of shoes he had to share with his brothers. And this is even as a young teenager. This is, not as a 4-year-old. And he is spotted by a youth coach whose name is Spiros Velianatis. And Spiros Velianatis is, considered a fellow who's capable of developing talent, but it's in Greek amateur basketball in the lower middle levels. He walks the neighborhoods of Greece, and he spots this kid, namely Giannis, playing tags with his brothers. And he says to himself, boy, this kid can really change direction when he plays tag. That's how he spots him. And I go, what? And he looks at him and he says he's got big hands. Maybe he'll probably grow into them, even though he's not very tall right now. He's certainly not very strong. But he's so stunned by his physical ability at tag that according to the New York Times article, he starts his own little internal dialogue with God about, I had a discussion with God in this moment, call me crazy, but this is the way I felt. Father, am I seeing correctly? How did I get this great talent? And he starts training him like mad. And this is as a teenager. And at the age of 19, he's picked the 15th pick in the first round of the NBA. And now he's 24 and he's the top player in the league. It is a bizarre, it's like a Disney movie. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'm excited about the Greek, but I'm also excited about this youth coach, Spiros. Either he has a good eye or really good connections.
Yeah, I don't, well.
With the head coach.
Look, of course the Times.
You know who I mean.
Yeah, I don't. Look, the Times already is upset that money changed hands because he got a special job for Giannis's parents, and is that really kosher? And somebody pulls the guys and the reporter aside, said it's Greece. Okay, relax. Don't worry about it.
Well, that seems like against what the Times would think. I'm glad they got some money out of it.
Yeah.
Nigerians really have a tough time over there.
Well,
in the article.
And that is a main point of the story. So he comes back, and they go into all the details about his very destitute upbringing, including interviews with a fellow who owned the little cafe across the way from the basketball court, who when these Nigerian youths would come by before they played ball, they were all hungry. He gave them all sandwiches. And sure enough, last year, Giannis came back and visited his old hometown. And what's the first place he visits? The cafe. And he brings the guy his uniform from the All-Star game for the NBA.
Oh, that's nice.
And now it's on the wall.
Well, this is a heartwarming story.
Yeah, and it's so strange when you think about what American basketball youths go through. They got to go to the right high school, they got to be in AAU. God willing, they get coached by Mike Krzyzewski, and then maybe they go in the first round of the draft because they have to learn all these skills. This kid's playing tag.
Right. All right. So kids, get out there, play some tag. You might end up in the NBA.
All right. Well, thank you, Granger.
No problem.
Okie doke. This next segment is about something going on at Smith College. So I want to dedicate this segment to the Ferguson girls. Bobby, Sandy, and Nancy. My 3 favorite Smith alums.
All right.
Nancy was my best friend in high school, and she went to Smith, as did her mother and her sister. And, of course, Julia Child went to Smith, too. But anyway, when I was going to Princeton, Princeton was not a co-ed school, right? It was basically a men's school,
right,
letting women in, okay? So I loved to visit Nancy at Smith College.
Yeah.
They didn't live in dorms, they lived in houses.
Yeah. Oh, is that right?
Yeah, which were essentially dorms.
It's in Northampton,
but they had a
right?
house sensibility.
Yeah.
You could go down to breakfast in your jammies.
Really?
And they had flowers on the china.
Yeah, it sounds like a women's
it was
college.
all very
Right. Yeah.
civilized.
Yeah, okay.
And plus, Northampton was a really cute college town. Princeton is a cute town, not a cute college town. It doesn't have any funky, creative restaurants or, shops the way college towns often do. So I'm a fan of Smith College. Anyway, big article about clothes. Not a surprise, I guess. The clothes they wore. This is the title of this article in the New York Times this week. Just rags or valuable? And it's an article written by Vanessa Friedman, and it's about a clothing collection at Smith College. Now, this is maintained by a professor, Catherine Smith, who goes by the name of Kiki. And I think she actually went to Smith as well. Yeah, graduate of the college, and a costume designer, and a professor of theater. And so she gets to Smith in the 70s, and she's going through their costumes for theater productions. And she's realizing that they're not all like, big fancy to-dos that one would wear in a Shakespeare production, but some of them are just old clothes. And kind of interesting and kind of valuable, sort of historical garments donated by alums. And so she begins to take care of them and realize that they shouldn't all be in one giant pile for putting on a play. And she begins to curate them, take care of them, and, store them somewhat properly, etc. Add to the collection. Other alums send in additions, and she buys things. And what's different about this collection is it's, to some extent, everyday attire. So at this point, they have about 3,000 items, accessories and clothing. And these are not high-end designer attire like you find in the Metropolitan Costume Institute, all right, or in the FIT collection in New York. They're not historically significant. They're not aesthetically significant, but they're significant in that they kind of reveal the lives of women through the clothing they wore. And so the question is now, what do you do to properly maintain these objects? You need, Kiki Smith estimates you need a facility with climate control, etc., and so forth, that would probably cost about $7 million bucks. And plus, you need some kind of curator. She's not going to be there forever. She's 69 now. She doesn't want to retire until these things are properly taken care of. So to endow a position of curator would be probably another $3 million. So you need $10 million bucks to do this. The powers that be at Smith say it's not really on their radar to do this. And Kiki made a presentation a few years ago to the committees that were doing kind of a master plan for what happens next at Smith, including a renovation of their library. And she proposed including some kind of facility in the renovated library, and nobody bought it. So that's kind of too bad. The clothing is used by people, and it's simple things. It's things like aprons, house dresses, shoes that people wore, various just day-to-day objects from, a pretty good range of period, from the 19th century up to the present. And they're kind of anthropological objects. Classes studying history or classes studying literature, even classes studying mathematics have, utilized the pieces from the collection to learn from. It brings students in contact, in close contact.
They've got to decide they want to spend the money or not. I mean, it's really what it comes down to.
But it's tricky. Yeah. It's tricky because it's not sexy.
Yeah.
The big money is going to science, engineering.
It's
all
not
right?
sexy.
For a woman's school to say, we want to save old dresses, seems a little bit...
It's worse than it's not sexy. It's a little retro. It's a little bit like clothes are important. And that's running up against the tide, I think.
So, Kiki Smith says it would take some guts.
Yeah.
So, but here's hoping somebody steps up to do this, because that's where you learn about life, you know.
Yeah.
You know, having these gala costumes that only the 1% or the 0.5% wore is not going to tell anybody about women's life in the 20th century, the 19th century, the 21st century.
Yeah.
Okay. That would be like, you know, saving Beyonce's clothes. What does that really tell you about people? So we'll see. Another thing you pointed out to me is there's a new Hamilton exhibition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and it's just been...
it's in Chicago.
It's in Chicago. Chicago, apparently, more people have seen Hamilton in Chicago than in New York.
Which means they have a bigger theater there. But let's assume it's big there. It's big in Chicago.
So they put together this exhibition to kind of straighten out people about the actual history.
Because it turns out that not everything in the musical is 100% accurate.
Right. And Lin-Manuel Miranda is open about that.
Yeah.
He says, you know, to some extent, I did make stuff up.
Right.
Okay. Newsflash, don't go to Evita thinking you can pass a test on Argentinian political history.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not it. And so they put together an exhibition. It costs $13.5 million to put together. It's multimedia. It's got all kinds of fun things going on in it. By the way, that costs more than putting together the original musical.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So the question is...
but they'll make their money. They're charging $38 or something for admission. You know, it's a money-making venture.
And they say that Joanne Freeman, a professor of history, that from, I think, Yale, that they have as a consultant working on it, says there are a couple ways you can look at these things. Yeah. You can look at the musical and say, the history isn't accurate, you know, that's bad, I hate it for that reason. Or you can look at it and say, all right, everything's not accurate in this musical. Let me tell you, you know, explain it to you. And really, people have gotten whipped up in a frenzy about Hamilton that has never happened before.
Yeah, and I'm sure the exhibit
why not take advantage of it?
It's kind of high tech and interactive. I'm sure it's worth the $38.
If you can make money teaching history, even if it's in this way, why not?
Well, that's the story.
Why not?
You can make money teaching history.
Because you don't make money teaching art history. I'll tell you that.
Well, you never know. You need the right musical. Gino Marchetti died. So who's Gino Marchetti?
Who is Gino Marchetti?
Gino Marchetti was, if you would ask people in 1965, 1963, who was the greatest defensive football player of all time, the answer was Gino Marchetti, if not the greatest football player of all time. So a couple of years have passed since then. But Marchetti, it's an interesting story. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. He came back from the Army. He was going to attend bar with his dad. And he's a very big guy. So someone saw him on a racetrack, who was associated with Modesto Junior College, got him to go there to play football. The next thing you know, he's in the National Football League, which is emerging in the 1950s, and he becomes a stalwart of the great Baltimore Colt teams. And he plays in what was considered for many years the greatest football game of all time, the 1958 championship between the Baltimore Colts and the New York Football Giants, which went to overtime, made Johnny Unitas a household name, and actually saved the NFL from oblivion because it was on the verge of perhaps going under at the time. He made the critical tackle of Frank Gifford, a name that you know, Tamsen, and he broke his leg on that play.
Ooh.
Watched the rest of the game from the sideline. It was a pretty serious broken leg, but it's what gave them the opportunity, gave the Colts the opportunity to come back and win the game in overtime. And when he retired, he started Gino's, which you might be familiar with.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Of course you are.
Fast food.
Exactly. Yeah. That's Gino Marchetti.
I didn't know that.
I know you didn't know that.
That's a revelation.
Yes, so that was, and he was one of the first guys to get into something that was a huge moneymaker. After he got out, he sold the chain ultimately to the Marriott Corporation for $48.6 million. He had 450 restaurants. A lot of those ended up becoming Roy Rogers restaurants. That's how Roy Rogers began. And that's where the Gino and Gino's comes from Gino Marchetti. And after the game, they asked him at the end of his career, probably in the last few years, about the great game in '58, and he said that game made a tremendous difference. It made us well known. It allowed me to open the restaurants. And then the Times says he might have added that he had one more reminder of that game. After being injured, he always walked with a limp.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in any event, Gino Marchetti was a huge name.
All right. News to me.
Yeah.
Interesting news. Also passing away this week was Doreen Spooner. You may not know that name, but she was the first woman to become a full-time staff photographer for a British national newspaper. So she was a great photographer. Her real one of her great claims to fame was a picture of the two women involved in that sex scandal trial of John Profumo, the British Secretary of State for War.
Brought down the government in the Great Britain. And I can see the photo in the Times of the two women.
She takes a photo of two of the women involved.
She snuck in. She snuck in and got the big photo. But she has a lot of big photos. I mean,
yes.
And she's a lot of funny things to say.
Yes, she did. And she actually, her father gives her a cheap little camera when she's about 8 years old. Yeah. And the rest is history. She gets hooked on photography. And she kind of has to fight her way through, obviously. But this is what she says about it. She said, you cannot expect the men to turn around and say, after you, dear. It's a competitive world, and you are out there competing, and the photographer's sex makes not an atom of difference. Don't put on the weaker sex act. It will not work. Still, she said, I like to think I played a small part in changing attitudes, never waving a feminist flag, just by getting on with my job.
Yeah.
And, you know, when she first gets photo credits in the paper she works for, it reads, by camera girl Doreen Spooner.
But she learned to like that. She called herself camera girl after a while. But
it did rankle her at first, and she took many fun, interesting, significant photographs, including quite a few photographs of Twiggy. Remember Twiggy?
Yes, she said you can't take a bad picture of Twiggy.
Right, which is interesting. Her real name was Leslie Lawson.
Well, Twiggy's still around. But I also like the bit at the end because she got the assignment of taking, what shall we call them? Racy photographs?
Yes, she's working for The Sun in the 1970s. She actually retires before the whole digital revolution, but she's working for Rupert Murdoch's Sun.
Right.
And on, I guess it is page 3, they have topless photos. Right. And so she got the assignment of taking these pictures as well. And the models actually said they didn't really mind posing for her. You never mind getting your kit off for Doreen, says one. It's like undressing in front of your granny.
Oh, there you go. She's a pip. It was a funny old bit, but she obviously accomplished a great deal. So you had a book for, you've been reading some book. You actually are following through on a recommendation, which is nice.
I did just read that book, The Beneficiary, by Janie Scott.
And you like it.
I did like it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure everyone would like it.
Yeah.
It's the story of, a mainline Philadelphia dynasty and their estate. And the main character is Janie Scott's father, Robert Montgomery Scott, who, I guess, did a lot of, well, he was a lawyer. He ends up president of the Philadelphia Museum of Fine Arts. And it's his story. But it resonated with me from being in the Philadelphia area. Also, there were certain connections with the Tyler family. And, my beloved Bucks County Community College is on the estate,
Right.
the Tyler estate. So there were lots of things that made sense to me in this book and kind of illuminated.
But the story is
this whole
the
period.
revelations are to the woman who writes it, but she didn't understand her father without reading his journals.
He was basically a socialite.
But at the same time, he was a manic depressive. And
depressive and tremendous alcoholic, dies.
Much of which she learned about by reading his journal.
Well, she knew he was an alcoholic, but she didn't know the depths of his feelings about that. And, some of the things he got into. So it's finding his journals, which he told her he would leave to her, but he didn't tell her where they were. She takes actually years to find them, but eventually does. So it's an interesting picture of that life. And again, supposedly her great-grandmother was the model for
the Philadelphia
Catherine
story,
character in the Philadelphia story.
Right.
So it was interesting. It was a fun read, but again, not perhaps for everybody unless you're really interested in learning about that. So, and also an article in the Wall Street Journal, how eating more of what you love can make you healthier. Mm-hmm. And really, it's the story of prebiotics. So you and I happen to be talking this weekend about probiotics.
This is like yogurt and stuff
like that. Things that encourage beneficial bacteria in your gut. Turns out we need bacteria in our systems to make us healthier.
Right.
And so prebiotics feed the probiotics.
But the headline is, eat a complete diet, eat a wide range of foods. You don't just eat one food.
You need a diversity.
Right.
So that all these things
whether it's
work
pre
together.
or it's pro, if you get the balance
and the
diet,
main thing is it needs to be complex. You need fiber.
Yeah.
And so do that. Eat more vegetables.
Eat more vegetables, right.
Haven't we heard that before?
I think so, but eat every balanced diet even more than eat more vegetables. All right, so here we go. We just have a couple more obituaries, then you can go. Red Kelly. Red Kelly was a great hockey player, died at the age of 91, won 8 Stanley Cups, 4 Stanley Cups with Detroit, 4 Stanley Cups with Toronto. He was one of the first what are so-called offensive defensemen. You as a defense person in hockey will relate to this, Tamsen. In other words, he wasn't the kind that just sat back. Although I think of you as a defensive defense person, but he would lead.
Offensive defense.
He was an offensive defenseman.
You think I was defensive?
Yeah. No. Excuse me.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Did you not watch?
I didn't understand.
One wonderful goal.
I didn't understand your game. Okay. Well, let's talk about that offline. In any event, he was just an outstanding hockey player and is well known and well respected. What was interesting to me about this is that after all his accomplishments, his 8th Stanley Cup, he was going for his 9th Stanley Cup, and it turns out he was incredibly superstitious, as athletes can be. He's on the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're playing the Philadelphia Flyers. This is 1976. This isn't a million years ago. And he spreads throughout the locker room pyramids to create pyramid power, so that the pyramid shape might capture and transmit an energy force to those in its vicinity.
In the 70s, pyramids were big.
So that was his.
They were actually people would actually put them under their beds as a marital aid.
Okay, so here's the thing. All right, you might think, there you go, he's all set for the 9th Stanley Cup, and they tried it, and it turns out it didn't work out. Why didn't it work out? Because they played the Philadelphia Flyers. And when they played the Flyers in Philadelphia, they would play a recording of Kate Smith singing God Bless America. And that would overwhelm the pyramid power. And this and the series...
This is like monotheism against polytheism?
All I can tell you is that the Stanley Cup that year went to the Philadelphia Flyers, not Toronto.
Okay, I'm going to overlook that remark about my offensive qualities, because I know you're bereft about your beloved Islanders having
I appreciate
been, shut out.
So here's the main obituary we're going to close with. Go ahead, Ken.
Joe Sullivan, Loesser. and a singer who preserved Broadway legacy. So Joe Loesser was married to Frank Loesser.
Right.
And you know Frank Loesser.
Yes, I do. Most Happy Fella, Guys and Dolls.
How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying,
yes,
etc. And so she met Frank when she starred in Most Happy Fella.
Right.
Okay. In around 1956.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's actually, as I understand it, it was Frank's first wife who introduces them.
Oh, well, I'm glad we got that. Yes.
And you know his first wife.
Who is his first
Lynn
wife?
Garland.
No, do I?
We talked about her earlier this year because Frank wrote Baby It's Cold Outside as a party song.
And they sang it
for
together.
Him and Lynn
that's
to
right.
Sing.
I forgot that.
And she is upset when he actually sells it and gets money.
All right, okay.
Let other people record it. She said, that was our song, Frank.
Yeah,
our
right.
song.
You can see
but anyway, so they, Joe and Frank fall in love. They're both married. She gives him an ultimatum, be divorced, marry me by, such and such a date, 1959, or forget it, I'm out of here.
She gives him an exact date, like August 1 or something?
May 1.
And they married 2 days before the deadline.
Right, okay.
But here's what I love about that.
What?
That's the story of Guys and Dolls. So Adeline, right, and Nathan Detroit, she says to him, we have to get married. She gives him a deadline to get married in Guys and Dolls. It's the same exact thing.
Well, I guess if it works for Adelaide,
well,
I guess it could work for Joe.
I think it worked the other way. I think.
Well, wait a minute. When did when was Guys and Dolls?
I have to believe that this happened first, and then he put into Guys and Dolls. We'll figure it out.
No, it can't be.
It was after
Guys and Dolls. Well, Guys and Dolls must have been before 1959.
Yeah, I guess it was.
Okay,
yeah,
we can Google this in a nanosecond, but we're not going to.
It's too much of a coincidence, though. Okay. A lot was going on at this time.
Anyway, so that's all very interesting. Anything else you want to say? Oh,
well,
you know what I like about her?
What?
Worked her way through Columbia University, working at Lord and Taylor.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Listen, there were a lot of things that's strange about her. I mean, she decided to put her career aside. She was supposedly an excellent singer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then she puts her career aside because he expects her to be home to make dinner.
It wasn't appropriate for her to perform.
Right.
Frank didn't want to come home at night to an empty house.
So she's raising the kids. He died at a very young age at 59. He was 17 years older than her. She's 42. She's young by today's standards.
So she actually starts performing.
But not for a while.
Yeah, but eventually she does.
But it doesn't occur to her right away. I mean, I don't understand it, but eventually she does.
Well, she is the keeper of the flame. She has been, the manager of the music.
And yes, so she has her own career.
Yeah.
She's a great singer.
Yeah.
But as you say, she's the manager of the music. But and the closing line in the obituary, I think, is interesting. Or it's in the last couple paragraphs.
Her aim, she told the Washington Post in 2004, was that every time they say Rodgers and Hammerstein, Cole Porter, they should say Frank Loesser. I think he belongs there.
And she's absolutely right. Frank Loesser was the equal of those two. He was great. And we're going to close by playing what was called the Fugue for Tin Horns, which is from Guys and Dolls, which is the greatest opening number in the history of Broadway. And as it happens, since we talked about the Derby, it's about horse racing.
All right.
So with that, we'll see you next week.
Tamsen and Dan reading the paper.
Until then, bye-bye.
I got the horse right here, the name is Paul Revere, and here's a guy that says if the weather's clear, can do. This guy says the horse can do. If he says the horse can do.
I'm picking Valentine, 'cause on the morning line, the guy's got him figured at 5 to 9. But make it FS10, he wins it by a half, according to this here in the Telegraph.
For Paul Revere I'll bite, I hear his foot's all right. Of course it all depends if it's red last night.
I know it's Valentine, the morning works look fine. You know the jockey's brother's a friend of mine. And just a minute, boys, I got the feed box noise. It says the great-grandfather was equipoised.
I tell you, Paul Revere, now this is no bum steer. It's from a handicapper that's real sincere.
I'm picking Valentine, 'cause on the morning line, the guy's got him figured at 5 to 9. So make it FS10, he wins it by a half, according to this here in the Telegraph. epitaph.
Paul Revere.
I got the horse. Ride.